Hello, welcome to the CAIANH Administration Onboarding Training. My name is Sarah. I am one of the Grant Lifecycle Managers here at CAIANH. Our agenda for this training are these 5 topics. So we will start with going through the team, then talk about some tools, go through the policy landscape throughout the university and our sponsors, then talk about some common procedures that research PRAs use as well as PIs, and then go through next steps on how you can continue your trainings. So these are our learning objectives. The key here is to streamline your administrative work and clearly set expectations of the administrative team's capacity so that you can focus on project implementation and that we can work efficiently. This is just a starter pack, this training, which is unbelievable because it's still very long, but it is meant to show you where to go when you have questions and how to get started when you're looking to do a task. So to begin, I'm going to go through each of the people on our team, their roles, and what tasks they help with as far as administration. So first we have Erin Poole. She is the Assistant Director of CAIANH. She has many responsibilities, some of which are listed here. Her preferred email is the CAIANH.hr especially for HR questions, and then other things related, related to more general, not HR, would be her regular email there. She's also in that CAIANH fiscal email, so feel free to communicate with her through that. She will see those emails. So Erin has oversight of department resources and funds. She has oversight of training and staffing for the department. She's the one on our team who approves travel for all employees and non-employees. She is the liaison between our team and the executive committee of CAIANH. She manages our team. She oversees respondent compensation, which is the gift cards. She works with the building, any issues with the building. And she's also has a lot of experience working with PRA, working as a PRA and working on projects currently. So she's a great resource as far as project work as well. And she really bridges the gap between project work and administration. Next, we have Jen Russell, who is an HR manager here. She mostly works on a project called TipCap, but some percentage of her work, of her role is towards HR department tasks, such as managing the yearly performance review, managing hiring and onboarding, and being a liaison between our department and central HR. Her preferred email for HR tasks is the CAIANH HR email. And for both, thinking about HR questions for both Erin and Jen, they definitely prefer you to first ask them before going to central HR. So I know that sometimes it can be confusing with when we're working, we have the central HR and we have HR in the department, but it'll be most efficient if you first reach out to that CAIANH HR email to try and get your answer. And if they don't have it, they will then direct you towards the HR, central HR. Next is Hip, who is the IT manager, and this is his email here. He is responsible for department specific IT needs, so helping you set up your computers. He does computer setup and troubleshooting, and he does IT purchases for the department. So the key for this training is that all IT purchases need to go through HIP. So you should not be purchasing IT of any kind. So that's software, data, hardware, you name it, it should go through HIP 1st. Next is us. So I'm Sarah, Sarah, and then Isra. We are the grant lifecycle managers. Our preferred email is the CAIANH fiscal email. And then those are our 2 other emails. They are personal emails there. So just to give you a little context of these different tasks that are listed, we have split responsibilities by project and by PI. So if we're working with Dr. Manson's projects, each of us have half of those bigger center grants, and then we each are assigned to about half of the PIs in the department to help. This is meant so that we can really get a handle on specific projects and go deeper on certain people's portfolios so that we can help as much as we can. We have fiscal oversight for sponsored projects. We create and manage the fiscal processes for the department, and we stay up to date for grant policies, procurement rules, university rules. So we help monitor the allowability for the spending considering those rules. We are the liaison between the Office of Grants and Departments, grants and contracts in our department, and then meaning that we will, if you have a question or a need from OGC, we'll be the ones who do that communication so that it's streamlined and simplified. We manage the funding distributions, which we'll go into depth later in this training, and we help support the final and mid reports for sponsored projects upon request for PIs. We have also been helping more with proposals, and we are hoping, we have a goal to align more the pre-award and post-award so that when we do get a project after we applied for a grant, we already know that we can implement that project administratively. So as you can see, we have a lot of responsibilities. So whenever I'm talking about in this training, and generally resources and ways that you can use tools to figure out the answer for yourselves before you ask us, it's not because we are trying, we're not kind or not trying to work with you. It's really because we want you to be able to most efficiently do your work, and we don't want to be the bottlenecks for the work that you need to get done. And lastly, we both work very closely together, so just understand that we're in constant communication, and if you ever find that we're not in line with something, just reach out to us and we'll figure out the best answer. Next is Lisa Lewis. She's the fiscal assistant for the department. Her preferred email is the CAIANH fiscal email, so most only email her through that. Lisa is in charge of processing the purchases in the marketplace for the department. She processes scopes of work for department consultants. She processes subcontract invoices. She does journal entries, which is transferring expenses when they hit the wrong account code. And she's trains on and processes the non-employee reimbursements. Lisa is very good at her job, and she's been here a while, so she knows when things are not going to make it through the process beyond us. So if she ever comes to you and says, oh, this is missing an item, that's because we're just trying our best to make it so that down the line it doesn't get sent back and we have to start all over again. So it's all the specific details on invoices and things like that are from experience, just so that we can make it most efficient after it leaves our department and goes on to the next step for approvals. So next is the principal investigator, and what they're in charge of is, of course, project and research implementation. They are also in charge of PRA training and management. So if you're finding They even, with these administrative tasks that you're missing something in your training, you should reach out to the PI and your manager to figure out those missing gaps. They have overall oversight of the project's budget, creating, monitoring, and reporting it. So although our team helps with it, the buck stops at the PI, so that is part of university policy, so they have that oversight. They manage and submit the yearly requests, yearly reports, sorry, like the RPPR, and then any requests like the NC no cost extension or the carry forward. They manage and submit proposals that, of course, and then they monitor subcontracts, which is money going out from their grants. They make sure that those organizations are spending appropriately and billing appropriately. And then PRAs, professional research assistants. So those responsibilities really vary from team to team. So here's examples of administrative tasks that you will be responsible for. And I've highlighted administrative tasks because this should not be anywhere near to most of your job. This is just a small portion. And as I said, this training is meant to make it so that that portion of your job is even smaller. So of course, we want you to focus on project implementation, but there are some administrative tasks that often come with this role. So we just want you to be prepared for those tasks. So some of those things, which we will go over later in the training, are event planning and coordination, travel setup and reconciliation for non-employees especially, pulling and gathering financial reports for the PI, making and reconciling purchases for the project work, and submitting and monitoring consultant scopes of work. So those will all be things that we'll go through later. So I've put together a spreadsheet that kind of goes through all these different responsibilities. So this is something that you can look at a little bit later, but I'll quickly go through it. So these are our different roles. GLCM stands for Grant Lifecycle Manager, and it just shows who's responsible for what for different tasks. So just to give you a lay of the land, the pink is things that always start with a form stack request. So even though, for example, IT purchases, the IT manager HIP is in charge of, that doesn't mean that you have to reach out directly to him. It starts with a form stack request. And then green is the things that PRA might work on. So just to be involved with. So just to highlight that, because you can see that the PRA, this is more, has overall responsibility for this. So the PRA does not, it's more of the tasks that they're involved with. So feel free to look through this on your own time, but I just thought this would be helpful if you're wondering who of us helps with what. This is kind of where to get started. Okay, so next section is talking about the tools that you have available to you, and that you should certainly use and will use. So I advise everybody to tag each of these tools. The first one, which you've probably already seen, is the intranet. And this is where we have announcements, different calendar events, and then a lot of the fiscal processes that we're going through are on here as well. Most of these resources as well that I'm going to list in a bit can be found from this page. So if you ever lose this PowerPoint and you don't know where to get started, the intranet will have that. So next is the form stack. This I will reference constantly. This should be, for administrative work, this should always be your first thought. So I like to start on this, the landing page, which has fiscal and grants management, which is what we're talking about here, human resources, and travel and events, which we're also talking a bit about. You can also tag, this one has all the detailed tasks that we're going to go through later, so you can always tag that if you find yourselves using that more, but I just like to point out that there is this landing page. Next is the smart sheet. We'll go over this more closely later, but this is what your smart sheet looks like, and you'll just want to have that linked up, have a bookmark, or you can download it to your desktop as an app, but you won't be using it too much, so it's best just to bookmark it here. I'll go through what these different teams are, but the Procurement Service Center is a great resource for figuring out how to pay for travel and all the different financial procedures and rules for the university. Then this is not considering sponsored projects, but that's a good place to get started. And they have just revamped their training. So let's look at that. Oh, get help, the PSC knowledge base. So this is a good way to get started. If you have a question, you can type it in there, and there's a lot of resources here. Next is the Office of Grants and Contracts office website. So this is where you're going to find a lot of the resources for the Office of Grants and Contracts for sponsored projects. So although we are, as I said before, the liaison to communicate with them, you can still find a lot of rules and a lot of key things about working with sponsored projects on this site. And then next is the YouTube, which I will click into. So this is where we post a lot of the trainings, like this one. So any trainings that we've done in the past will be on our little YouTube channel. Feel free to read through, watch those, and just understand that some of these are duplicates. So we have the Smart Sheet training, we have one that was for each of these. We have a live one and then one that I quickly recorded. So this 13-minute one is going to be the quicker, just go to one, and then this 52-minute one will be the live one that will have more context and answer more questions. Sorry to make you dizzy. And then next is the speed type list. Speed type list. So that's here. So you'll want this tagged as well. And this is where we go to find our account codes. This is what a speed type. So all of our projects are listed, have different numbers that show, for where the money falls. And then they also have project numbers, their parent routing number. And then this sheet will also show you whether Isra or I work on the project, who the project is, the common name of the project, and then the dates will also be helpful. There's a lot of other information that you'll find that really is more for Isra and I, but it is a great resource, especially when you're working on more than one project. The other things I have listed here, I'm not gonna go show you, but InfoEd you'll use for EPERS, and CU Marketplace you'll use sometimes for purchases, and we'll go through that at later in the training. So next I'm going to go through the policy landscape and kind of the layers of the policies that we're working with, especially with the work that we do. So just to start, for some context, this is the Employee Fiscal Code of Ethics that is also linked here on the PowerPoint. Key is that everyone is responsible for these actions here. And just to summarize, it is understanding that when you're using money through the university, you're using university resources, you're using tax dollar resources. And then another layer for us is that we're using federal resources. So it is important to be prudent, and to use integrity when you are using these funds. You of course need to follow all applicable policies, laws, regulations, rules that are assigned by the contracts, the university, the sponsor, and the department. So there's a lot of layers of rules that I'm about to go through, and it is important as part of the fiscal code of ethics to go through those. And then part of this too is that that you need to report potential or perceived fiscal misconduct. So this is how you report it, and especially I find, when people are working on project teams, you may see things that you that feel concerning or look like fiscal misconduct. So this is the ethics line here. It's anonymous, so just so that you know about this if something ever comes up. All right, so here's a landscape that we are working with, and the layers or the pyramid of regulation that we need to follow. So on the left, you'll see university policies. So that shows that no matter what, we need to be following university policies. On the right, you'll see public laws. So that shows that no matter what, we need to follow the public laws. And then in the middle, we have these different layers that we look at when deciding whether or not to make a purchase. So on the top, we have the award terms and conditions. So that is the what the actual notice of award says when you get a grant. That is going to have a certain layer of rules. Next is the program-specific requirements and guidelines. So this is what was in the initial proposal or what was in the initial request for proposal, and any guidelines that are associated with the funding announcement, and specific stipulations for this type of grant or this grant. Next is the agency regulations, and that is the specific regulations like from the sponsor, so from NIH or ACF, different sponsors that we work with each have their own agency regulations. And then last is this 2 CFR 200, which is the cost principles, which all sponsored projects use, and it is pretty broad. So as you can see, I put a pyramid on the back here, and that's because these get less and less specific as we go down. Also, it shows that when we're trying to decide whether or not we should purchase something, whether or not it's allowable, we look at the top layer first. If that says that it's not allowed, we do not need to look any further. So if the 2 CFR 200 says that it is allowed and the award terms and conditions say that it's not allowed, then it's still not allowed. But if the award terms and conditions doesn't give us any information, then we will go one layer lower to the program specific. So the the NIDDK, the specific department of NIH, or what's on the request for proposals, then we would go there and look at the rules within that. If that doesn't give us any information, then we'll go to the agency, so general NIH rules. And then if that doesn't, we'll go to the 2 CFR 200. So all this to say, I hope that you are thinking, wow, it's really hard to purchase things here. Yeah, with on-sponsored projects. And that is if there's anything that you take away from this, yes, that is the idea. There is a lot of rules around purchasing and around spending with sponsored projects. And then the last thing is that the stricter rule will prevail. So let's say the university policy has one thing and the award terms and conditions has something that's less strict, than the university policy prevails, or vice versa. Okay, so now I'm gonna kind of go through each of those sections for the most part. So we've already quickly mentioned this, the Procurement Service Center and the Office of Grants and Contracts. So these are the university policies that we're gonna work with. The Procurement Service Center, as I said, is not considering sponsored projects. So they're really more about university-wide fiscal policies on general funding sources. And when you are, trying to think about why the heck does this policy exist, you might want to consider that this is that they are working on a very large scale. So they're working with a lot of people like us. So even though we might not be of risk, or, it's compounded. So all their rules are really looking at how do we cut down risk on a large scale. This is a CU-wide department. It's not specific to Anschutz. And then I also like to point out that there is a helpline that you can call, and it is very helpful to get some answers to general procurement questions. And sometimes if you ask me a question, I won't know the answer to it, and I will tell you to call PSC. Again, remember that they are not considering sponsored projects, so use your use what you've learned about sponsored projects when they answer those questions and kind of put that into context. And I also recommend to make notes on these calls because sometimes their answers can differ. So it's important to, keep notes. To go back to when you're working on whether something is allowed or not. These are two links here that are very helpful for, I've already talked about the PSC knowledge base, and then I'll show you this one that I have linked, which is just general finance policy. So if you're wondering about a policy, or if you want to, in your free time, explore policies, that is all here. Next is the Office of Grants and Contracts. So we're the ones who communicate with them, as I said, but this is a helpful go-to document that kind of talks about the university and what's allowed on sponsored project and what's not. And I will note that this says usually, so there are exceptions to every rule. But this is a good guideline to think about whether or not something is allowed. Just making sure, okay. And then next is thinking about the CAIANH, our department rules and procedures. And just to set some context here, our work is unique in that we are community first, we're partner first in our work, and we are collaborative with the communities we work with. And sometimes the rules and procedures from the university are hard to work with the communities that we are serving and in support of. So all this to say is that we have made additional, or we have found solutions to work with the university and grant policies that work for our research and our work. And we've also created some additional procedures and rules that are because of this additional context. They are all, it's from experience that these rules and procedures were created, and then I also will note that we are here to work with you. So if you are finding that a policy is not working for your project, we will work to find a solution for that project, for that issue. Our team is here to work with you and find a way to still follow the rules and be community first. Then last, we are evolving, and things, unfortunately, as much as I want them to be, are not black and white. So we ask for patience and for your allowance for change as we learn and evolve the interpretation of a lot of these rules and policies. So I've linked again the form stack and the CAIANH intranet here because these are the key This is where you'll find our rules and procedures, and they need to be followed just as much as the university policies. So next, thinking about the NIH grant. So this is that added layer that's going to create a lot more rules for us as far as spending. So this, just to get you started, is a very helpful link of what's allowable. So if you're ever about to purchase something, someone said something, it's allowed, and you're like, I'm not sure, this is a great place to start. To see, kind of the rules around this if you're working with an NIH grant and you've already gone through those other layers that we talked about. So a key here is that if something is listed in the proposal and then we are awarded the funds, even if it is something that usually is not allowable, that will mean that it is allowable. So for example, usually food is not allowed on grants. And however, if we're working on a diabetes project that is bringing in folks with diabetes for a session as part of the research, and it's over a long period of time, it is definitely appropriate and necessary for the project to have snacks at that event. So that would be something that the PI would write into their proposal. And if it was funded, that means that it is allowed, even though it is otherwise an unallowable expense. So if you're trying to figure out if something's allowed, it's important to have all of the context. And then the other way to get prior approval is that the PI can work with us and Office of Grants and Contracts to get prior approval through an email. So if they didn't include it in the proposal, but they later realized that they need to purchase something that's usually on that unallowable list, they can communicate with the sponsor and get that prior approval. So when you're making a purchase, it's important to know what has been prior approved, because I might say, wait a minute, this isn't allowed, even though your team has already gotten that approval. So I need all that context because I might not have it. And then last is this cost principles and uniform guidance. And so this is the last line of defense, or the floor, not the ceiling. So it's very broad. And a lot of times people will try to go right towards the cost principles to figure out if something is allowed or not. And I'll tell you that's very tough to do because it's not very specific. A lot of the other examples that I've already showed you, like what's in the notice of award, what's in the NIH policies, those are really specific, and the cost principles and uniform guidance are more broad. So the four key, just to like summarize this very large document, the four key pieces to it are that expenses must be allowable, reasonable, allocable, and consistent. So allowable, that's everything we just went through, as well as, there's just like a general list of things that are usually not allowed. So it needs to either not be on the unallowable list, or it needs to have that prior approval. It needs to be reasonable. So it doesn't always need to be like the least expensive option, but it needs to be reasonable for the work that's being done. It needs to be allocable, which means that it needs to be, if an expense is used across multiple sponsored projects, you need to be able to have a way to allocate it across those projects. The easiest example of this, which isn't necessarily relevant in our work, is, if there's two different labs and they each use a bunch of test tubes, you need to be able to charge a portion of those test tubes to one lab and another portion of those test tubes to the other lab. And then it needs to be consistent. So across different projects within our department, we should be treating different expenses consistently. And a good example in our department is computers. We don't charge computers onto our indirect costs. They are used for projects. So we are able to allocate computers across projects because in all other cases of purchasing computers, that's how we've done that. And that doesn't mean that, oh, we've always done it this way, so it has to be this way. It means that we need to be making decisions consistently across projects and across the department. And then to summarize all this even further, something that you will hear us say is this reasonable and necessary test. Does this expense pass the reasonable and necessary test? Is it reasonable and is it necessary for the work of the project? And to be honest, the answer is very often no. So that's what you want to think about. If you're about to purchase something, you want to ask yourself, is this reasonable and is this necessary? Will the project still function without this purchase? So that's the idea of the reasonable and necessary test. So sometimes if I'm not sure if this is an allowable expense or not, I might come back to you and say, does this pass the reasonable and necessary test? And then the key here with the cost principles and all of this spending and all of these rules is that would you be willing to have this purchase, on front of a newspaper or online, or would you be comfortable with everybody possible knowing that this purchase was made on state and federal funds? And if the answer is no, or I don't know, or maybe, then you probably should not be making that purchase. And that is the end of part 1. So I'll do another recording for part 2.